Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and it's taken over 65,000 years for an AFL player to kick 6 goals in the Northern Territory. How fitting was it that Kozzy Pickett was the player to do it? What an amazing game from the young man. Joining me tonight to dissect the win in the Alice is veteran Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, Binman. Good evening, Demonland listeners. And the big question for this week, following that win, is the curse theory over? I love the quote from Super Mikado, who was one of the contributors to this podcast in the past, where he said, "It's good to get back to superstition and mysticism 16 games after winning a grand final."
That was always going to happen. I don't know who thought that curses were over, that MFCSS was dead and buried. It was always going to come back with a vengeance. I'll talk about it in my match wrap-up. With 3 minutes to go, my MFCSS was raging, as you can imagine. But joining us tonight, and he's promised not to talk about curses anymore, is Binman. Good evening, Binman.
Good evening. Well, that wedges me rather. So Weber, the artist that I was referring to last week, posted in the podcast thread a picture, a fresh painting lifting the curse. Now, I know he's apparently somewhat of a medical expert, so I'm pretty sure his inoculation worked, but it was only just to get us over the line. So we still weren't hitting our straps, but it got us the 4 points. So big ups for Weber. And I think that's got a week in it, that inoculation, that little burst from Weber. So one more week and we'll be good to go.
Yeah, well, we're just taking it 1 week at a time, and I'm just banking wins where I can get them at the moment. I'm not worrying how we get them. I just want to get over the line. And finals, as we've always talked, the season starts again. So let's just try and get top 4. Well, no point burying the lead. Let's get right into the match wrap up, and it was the Kozzy show in Alice Springs. Kozzy Pickett was just sensational, kicking 6 goals, and let's face it, without Kozzy and his brilliance, we lose this match. 6 goals is the most goals any AFL player has kicked in the Northern Territory for premiership points. And as I mentioned in the intro, it was very fitting that he was an Indigenous player to achieve that milestone. And what a role model for the hundreds of Indigenous children in the crowd. The D's started the match very slow out of the blocks, and there didn't appear to be any spark or enthusiasm, and the commentators noticed that it was very quiet at ground level. Inaccuracy and Bailey Fritch's penchant for burning teammates, his third time that I've counted this season, led to a goalless first quarter, our worst start for the season. And the D's hit back in the second quarter, kicking 5 goals to 3, taking a 4-point lead going to halftime. Kozzy Pickett kicked 2 incredible goals from each pocket, stamping his authority on the game. Going into the third quarter, it was still a bit of a slog with the D's visibly not at their best. For the most part, the disposal was off, handballs were often passed to disadvantage, and there was fumbling aplenty. This is not the same team that stormed home last year. However, for those that like to parallel last season with this season, and B-Man, I'm looking at you, and we've had some people who don't want us to parallel last season with this season. The equivalent round last season was the draw to Hawthorn, and we lost the following week to the Bulldogs, who, surprise, are our opponents this week too. And then, of course, we went on to win all of our remaining games for the season, including the premiership. So dare to dream, Demonlanders. From late in the third and into the fourth, the D's piled on 7 unanswered goals, all but icing the match in the heat of the Alice. The D's had a 5-goal lead and then took the foot off the accelerator, and in true Demons fashion, they allowed their opposition to get a sniff and kick 3 goals to get within 3 goals with 3 minutes remaining. We were able to hold the power off and take the win, but as you guys can imagine, my MFCSS alarm bells were ringing. And here's where our amazing 3 goals within a minute in the grand final has come back to haunt me, because I now know all too well that it is very possible to kick 3 goals in a minute. That minute of madness in the grand final, if you remember, we almost kicked the ball into the forward line with seconds to go, possibly, remarkably getting a 4th, but it was, I think, track was tackled. So now I can never be secure with any lead ever again. I let my guard down on Sunday at 5 goals up. Next minute, I'm almost ripping the flat screen off the wall. This team can do it to you. George will talk more about the problems with our forward line shortly, but for me, it's clear that we need another tall forward option to assist Ben Brown. The small forward line experiment that worked well against the Lions and worked well against the Lions a couple of weeks ago. Kozzy got off the chain this week, but Bedford hasn't done much since that great game a few weeks ago, and our resting rucks aren't troubling the tall defenders and are, in fact, as George will mention a bit later on, are actually getting in the way of Ben Brown. Our backs were once again outstanding, and along with Pickett, if they didn't perform at their usual level, we would have lost the game. Port had 6 more inside 50s than us, yet our stellar backline was up to the task. Credit to Tomlinson for taking his chance in the absence of Petty. Petty is likely to return from health and safety protocols this week, so Tomlinson's spot in the side will be dependent on Lever's fitness with his shoulder injury. And finally, you could not help but notice the Clayton Oliver-sized hole in our midfield. His absence is sorely felt. Petrak and Viney had 30 and 28 disposals, but we need that great extractor. We lost the clearance count 40 to 27, despite clearly winning the hitouts. Clearances around the ground was where we were beaten the most. So perhaps, B-Man, can you give us your analysis of why that was? Did the Power bring an extra man to the stoppage? It's hard to tell on the TV, particularly when they're on the side closest to the camera, because of that. It's in the shade and you can't see anything that's going on at times. So what did you notice with stoppages?
It is really, really hard to tell what's happening on the television. It was even harder this week. I watched the replay before tonight, actually, before coming on, and I was singularly focused on trying to work out who Melksham was on. For the life of me, I could not work it out. I mean, I think he went between Aaliyah and the other sort of medium tall back there, interceptor.
George is shaking his head.
Burton, he wasn't on either.
Not Burton. No, not Burton. The other.
Jonas?
No. I'll think of it in a second.
Cleary.
Yes, Cleary.
He wasn't on any of them.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. Look, I don't know whether they brought an extra to stoppage. They do generally. I mean, most teams do against us. I think that probably the bigger answer is that we're, Gawn and Jackson probably aren't at their best, particularly Gawn.
Absolutely.
And we're not looking, the around the ground clearances is where we struggle, because that's where that's where we're often down. I don't know what our differential is on average, but from around the ground stoppage, it was not nearly as high as this weekend, obviously, but that's where the opposition can look to negate Gawn's tap work by bringing the extra to the stoppage or tagging more heavily the extractors. No question, obviously, Oliver being out of the team. I mean, it's just, he's one of the best footballers I've ever seen. You take him out of the team. I mean, this is one of the things I keep talking about, the myths of football, soldier out, soldier in palaver. Well, there isn't a soldier. It's like having Rambo go out and Darren Hinch being brought in. So, there's no one who's going to replace Oliver. So you're looking at 5, 6, 7 clearances around the ground, stoppages just right there gone. But the main thing I'd be thinking is Gawn's. He's certainly, for whatever reason, he's looking a bit hampered, and perhaps he hasn't come back fully from his injuries. Perhaps the curse is going, but a combination of those things. But it doesn't really bother Goody, and it's one of the things that I touch on in tactics, but it's a real sort of Goody's philosophy during the season of not addressing tactically obvious issues. Like he just let that play out because it wasn't hurting us. So if it doesn't hurt you, the key obviously is putting pressure if you lose those outside things, getting back to the Melbourne method. And our defensive system was much better. We've got players marking the ball down back. They struggled. We kept them to a pretty competitive score for a team that is well and truly up and about. And just on that, I just thought it was a wonderful win, a really, really terrific win. And I'm not being facetious or, obviously my thoughts about, where we're at physically in terms of the training that they're doing and those things. So in the conditions, in the heat, I thought, it really was an important win to get those 4 points. I thought in that third quarter, with the 11 minutes to go, we were looking down the barrel, 3 goals down at that point, and they were clearly the better team. They were the better team in the first quarter. I thought the second quarter was a 0-0 draw, and for the first half of that third quarter, they were clearly on top. I thought our ability to not concede scores, so I've talked about that a lot, obviously scoring quickly after that and dominating the second half is what looks great, but what kept us in that game is that they only got to a 16-17 point lead. They could have, if our defensive system wasn't so brilliant as you touched on, and I know George will talk to, that easily could have been a 4 or 5 goal lead. Once it gets out to 4 or 5 goals, statistically, you don't win many games of footy. So I thought it was a fantastic win, full of meritorious efforts, but it really goes to the point. There's a couple of key takeaways, Andy, for you and for accuracy.
They were inaccurate. They missed quite a few snaps and all that, and that could have been a different story had they.
If you swap Pal Pepper's game for Kozzy's game,
exactly.
Pal Pepper was terrific in that game, and I underrated him and thought he was a bit of a one-pace sort of, a bit like Robinson, but he's a lot better than I probably gave him credit for, or maybe I've just seen him and he's played well. But, he had some great snaps on goals in that third quarter as well, too, that could have put that margin on him. And Kozzy missed his first goal, which was from a set shot, but then kicked the next 6 straight. And it's pretty hard not to think that was a difference. That was a match-winning performance. From a number 3 pick. It was, I know you'll speak about because I don't want to steal your thunder.
That wasn't number 3 pick. His buddy, Luke Jackson.
Yeah. Sorry, Luke Jackson. But it was just fantastic to see it. And again, I know you'll speak to it, but that was the difference in the game, really. That accuracy was the difference in the game. It was a game that we easily could have lost. And just a quick thing about Port is that, people talk about us not beating teams inside the 8. And I've been looking for it. There's a post from someone on Demonland whose name escapes me, so I couldn't find the post, but he challenges that sort of narrative by saying when we beat them, they were in the 8, and also teams like Port are now not in the 8, but they've won 7 of their last 9 games. They're probably on the form ladder. They'd be right up there near the top of the tree.
Well, I said last week,
ripping form, and we rolled them in a must-win game.
Since we played them, we've won the same amount of games. We've both won 8 games since then.
Yeah, so look, there's other examples as well. So Richmond are in the 8 now. When we beat them, they weren't. I think that that's a bit of a misnomer. We've won more quarters this year. So arguably we're in better shape than we are last year. We were last year. There's heaps of other parallels. It's funny you should mention parallels, but one of the parallels, and I know we'll get to it because it was a question we're going to touch on, is this issue about not having a second tall. I mean, we could have played this last year because this was exactly what happened. Goody did this exactly. Will we go tall? Will we go an extra? He played that game for ages. And it was interesting, Montagna on first crack, he's sure that we're now going to go to a 2 tall, 2 mediums, 2 small setup. I just don't think that will happen. So many parallels to last season. I thought it was a fantastic game, full of really positive signs. We were getting our swarm back. Our ability to get forward was much better. Lots and lots of positives, and all of that without Oliver in the team. I think that it was a fantastic win. I was thrilled with it, and I have to say, at the sort of when we did get 15 points down, I wasn't confident that we would win that game at that point, which is an unusual feeling in the last couple of years. So I was sort of half resigned to losing. So it was fantastic that we didn't.
George, any general comments you want to make?
No, I think that's pretty well summed it up. The only thing I would add was I'm very grateful that Ken Hinkley was coaching that side.
Is your favourite?
I don't know how he keeps his jobs, and I'm sure a lot of the Port supporters are thinking the same way. Why in the hell were you kicking the ball around the ground, trying to switch on a ground that's really wide, when has been proven by teams that have won the grand premierships in the last couple of years that you can't do that against Melbourne. You can't do it against Richmond. It's just sapping for them. We had them covered easily every time they tried to do it, and their players just kept going round and round because that's what they've been coached and trained to do. But they haven't changed their techniques, and I'm afraid Port are not going to go anywhere while they don't make these necessary changes. Geelong showed what to do to beat Melbourne last week. You can't afford to play that way. They've learned from last year's final series. You can't play that way anymore, and he's still doing the same thing late into the 2022 season. So, eternally grateful to Ken. Unfortunately, I don't think you'll be around too long when the Port supporters get hold of you.
I mean, for me, that was one of the positive signs that, we're on the path back. I was just bemoaning the search function on Demonland before we came on. But I was looking for a particular post, which I couldn't find, but I did find the other one that I was looking for, and it was from Coach, a poster called Coach from a while back now in the thread about loading, and he was talking about the notion that you peak at a certain time, but even if you're not at the peak, we can still be good. So I'm just reading from his posts. It's worth noting that even if we're not at our peak, we can still be bloody good, as can other sides. Let's say your absolute peak readiness achieved for one game achieves a score of 100, then the game either side might get a score of 98, the game either side of that a 96, etc., etc. So it's not all or nothing. It kind of tapers off either side of the peak, but it's still a very high level of readiness. Right now, I reckon this was a week ago before the Port game. Right now, I reckon we're at around 80 to 85%, but that's just a guess. Only time will reveal if we nail a preparation or not, which is a really important point. The club will have a list of metrics they are looking at internally, and we'll have a very good idea if we're on track to peak at the correct time or not. And why I thought that was interesting was on that point about peaking is that your point, George, is a good one in terms of they just tried to manipulate the width of the ground and laterally, and it's just one, you're totally right. The premiership model is territory. Territory is now the fundamental part of footy that the premiership winners are doing. But the other part of that that I thought was real positive sign was how well we were covered that switch and how well we got our defensive system across, because that's such a demanding aerobic exercise to continually move basically 18 men from one side of the ground to the other to stop that switch, and we did it super well, whereas in the last few weeks, other teams have been able to sort of open us up a bit. The other thing, George, I thought about Port was that it was sort of what we were talking about last week, that their tools were so ineffectual, weren't they? Like, even Marshall, he's another player who I have to say, who, maybe I've underrated a bit. He looks a real classy player. He's putting on some size. So, it takes 6 or 7 years for some of these young gun forwards to really hit their straps. But their system of relying on three talls up forward is just, it's easy for a team with a good defensive zoning system like Melbourne to chop that down. And basically their three power forwards really had very little impact.
Oh, excuse me. Should have used the cough filter there. Tonight, well, let's get into tactics talk. Tonight on our tactics talk, B-Man, you're going to take a look at some interesting tactical tweaks that we've introduced and the philosophy of repetition. Take it away.
Yeah, so just really quickly, I mentioned after the Brisbane game that it was really evident that they were looking at a different type of handball and looking to be really aggressive with their handball. So handballing for territory, essentially, 15-metre handballs forward of the contest towards the goal. So not backwards, not little flip around the back, not this sort of equivalent of a lateral kick that we were just talking about that Port runs himself into trouble. But very aggressive handballs, or forward, long and high often, because it's technically got to be often because it's handballing directly over an opponent in front of them. And it's been a feature of all of our games since that Geelong game, and it was really noticeable in this game. And to me, it's a distinct tactical change that Goody's made. And there were a couple of times where we did it where, it probably goes to the point how long it takes something to become instinctive. There were a few handballs long forward to no one. There was no one on the end of the chain. There was one which, that who knows what it was probably just looking for, where Melksham wasn't in the square and Langers handballed over the top. But there was another one by Gawn where he handballed it from a ruck out for, it was about a 25, 30 metre handball into distance. But there were lots of them. Jordan was doing them.
Hibberd did it out and actually then went to a Port guy, but he definitely handballed long just out of to no one.
Yeah, so they're really looking to do it. It's a really obvious tactical, and it's interesting because that's no small thing to introduce because, it involves for it to work intuitively, everyone to know where that next going. It's like the other part of what we normally do is to kick it from those contests. So maybe maybe oppositions of setting up for that 3-quarter kick to stop that a little bit, and it's a way to break that down. It's a strategy to overcome other teams' strategies they've tried to employ against us. Whatever the case, it's definitely a new tactical tweak. And interestingly, because I was watching for it on the replay, Port do it a lot as well. So I wonder whether Goody's looked at some other teams and see, some of those strategies. There was a number of like 25-metre handballs that Port were doing over the top into space. So that was really interesting. Another one which has sort of happened, I've seen before, but I don't know whether it's quite as noticeable, but is track starting from directly behind in the centre square ball up. So him starting directly sort of in a line between the two goals, but on the defensive side of the setup, not on an angle, coming from directly behind and running at the drop down of the ball at pace, at full pace. He did it twice, really noticeable. He did about 3 or 4 times in this match, but twice were really noticeable. One set up a handball forward to Harms, who got it forward deep into the 50, and the other one was he did it and then didn't fire that long handball over, went to, but was blocked, and that's the one he kicked the ball, turned it straight over to one of their players on the halfback flank, and they took it down the other end and scored. But yeah, I'm not sure, George, or Andy, whether you've noticed that before. I mean, I've seen them hit that contest at pace, but it seems a real particular way, like directly from goal to goal, running hard, flat out at the contest and sort of jumping into it to grab the ball and then immediately releasing it forward. So just two tactical things that, particularly the handball, I'm guessing it's something that he's looking to develop and that will be a feature of our game for the rest of the season. And, to add to that, he's often criticised Goody for not being tactically flexible. So you add, I think, dropping Bowie out of the team for this match and leaving Gus in that position, the way that they played Jordan. And I think all season another theme. To be honest, I think this will change as we head towards the final. But this uber emphasis on defence, which was picked up in one of the more remarkable post-match presses. Last week I commented on the fact that last week's one went 4 minutes. Well, next one's, if we're on the law of mathematics, next week's will go for a minute, because this week's post-match presser went for 2 minutes.
But I noticed that too, and I couldn't believe that no one had any other questions. It was.
I think it was pretty simple, Andy. I think there were only 2 reporters.
Yeah, is that what it was? Is that there were 3 reporters? No one had it, but. What, they don't have a follow-up question? There was lots of things to talk about. Asked, how's Jake Lever? How's
I think
Max looked a bit off. Is he not fully recovered? Are they local newspaper reporters?
I think that was exactly the case, Andy. It was the Alice Springs Time or Bugle or whatever, and that was enough to fill the paper for the next day.
And Goody's no Brad Scott. He's like,
He's like, okay.
He was like, no worries. I'm out of here.
He was out of there before they had even said.
And one of his few quotes that he was able to make was this. He said, "Well, this is so like yes, we're down in our clearances, our contests, contested possessions were 20 down on our season average, but the Heat might have had something to do with that. Theirs was 20 down as well on their season average. But we led their tackle count by 15 and restricted the power to just 10 goals. But, tackle count by 15 was a real positive sign. And Goody said this, all we focus on is making sure our contest and defence is in check, and we'll get the opportunities on the back of that. For me, that's it in a bit in terms of, his philosophy about how to play the game. So he's been talking about that all season, right back to that Port game when we played them. We said we don't care about scoring. I mean, it was like a crazy thing for footy fans to be hearing, but it seems he's taken that philosophy to an extra sort of even to another degree. He's really emphasising the defensive. I think to hold it, to really emphasise it now, he'll, of course, will become more aggressive as the season progresses. Just the other thing on tactics was that philosophy of his. He clearly believes in repetition. So, this season, you talked about the parallels to last season. They're amazing. The systems, the way he's going about it, even the tinkering with this forward line, the dance he's doing around where we go two talls, what that makeup, the final makeup of the forward, went for all season last year, right through this period of, remember, it's easy to forget, will it be Wiedemann, will it be Brown? Brown goes off and does his mid-season thingo, and then do we go small? We went small for a couple of weeks. He just, I think he philosophically, he believes very strongly in the power of repetition, and I think that explains a lot of the things that fans find frustrating. The one that George picked up on was a good one last week about the fans, how frustrating people find the kick to the one spot. It's like, well, do you want to win more games of footy, or do you want sort of the aesthetic appeal of going wide and having a coast-to-coast goal? They just don't happen anymore, those sort of coast-to-coast goals. If they do, the opposition's asleep. So, it's just a really interesting way Goody's got, and I think it really is a key thing, predictability, but repetition of things that work. It makes sense, doesn't it? If it's worked once, there's a good chance it'll work again, but no guarantees, of course. But you repeat what's worked, very routine and systems focused.
Following up on your point about track and the way I noticed a few times Gawn tapped it to no one, like it to a spot, and I assume that was for track to run into, and it's hard to see on TV what actually happened, and I wasn't looking for that, but I assume in those instances where there was no one there, track was being held up by his opponents and perhaps couldn't get their full tilt. It's an interesting point that you bring up, and be good to be be actually at the game and sort of notice that and see whether that continues.
The other thing that does, Andy, is that they had a really strong midfield in, particularly in Boak and Wines, and we didn't. Comparatively, in the absence of Oliver, and you get it as far away from those sort of players as you can. So it sort of gives you some advantage from that perspective by not giving them the advantage.
There was a poster, again, I can't remember the poster, but it made me laugh. The sort of pushing back against the notion that we didn't play well in this game and the disrespect that shows to where Port are. I mean, they're travelling pretty well. Your critique of the coaching notwithstanding, George, but the quote was, it's not like we're the Harlem Globetrotters and they're the Washington Wizards. They're a footy team who've come out to play, full of seasoned veterans. And, I mean, Boak is one of the best mids that I've ever seen in footy. He's so consistent in his performance. He's so hard at it, and he doesn't waste any ball. Like, he's a terrific kick, good hands. Wines didn't really have much influence at all, did he? So those sorts of things would be interesting tactically to know what they did. And the other tactic thing in the game, and we'll touch on it later, but it is Melksham, the way they used Melksham in that match was really interesting. And it sort of relates a little bit to the discussion that we'll have about the forward setup.
All right, well, let's get into the positives. And for me, it's Kozzy. Not more needs to be said. That hasn't already. 6 goals in any game is an incredible achievement. But for Kozzy to do that in front of a large Indigenous crowd is just so special. He's kicked a number of bags of 3 goals and a PB of 4 goals in one match out of his 55 games to date. But this was his first big bag, and I'd like to see more of this from a selfish point of view. And okay, I won't be greedy. More 3 or 4s and the occasional 5 or 6 can't hurt. And we've praised Kozzy's pressure and defensive games many times, but you also want your small forwards putting on forward and more specifically scoreboard pressure, and where you can't put more scoreboard pressure than 6 goals. So well done to Kozzy. It's just an absolutely outstanding game. We don't need more than that. So George, I'll get onto your positive, which is our solid backline again.
Yeah, it's hard to follow on from Kozzy's effort, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's pretty impressive. That's the best I've ever seen him play. But certainly the backline, and Bidman's touched on this before, the backline is absolutely critical to holding us together where we are. You've only got to look at the points against on the ladder. We're number one in that at only 1,107 points against us for the season so far. The Cats and Freo are sort of 50 or 60 points behind us, but our backs are holding us together because the forwards aren't kicking the goals that we'll talk about this a bit later on, aren't kicking the goals in the same way that other teams are. So they're absolutely keeping us in the game. And what I think we're also seeing is a return to basically the grand final type backline team there. Tomlinson filled his spot beautifully. In the absence of Petty, he did exactly what he needed to. Yeah, absolutely cut out their options. You can criticise Stephen May, but then Marshall only got the 1 goal for the game. That was courtesy of a mark dead on the line. None of their other forwards did really anything. They were totally dependent on the people up the ground kicking the goals for them. Rivers seemed to slot in, although he had quiet numbers, but he seemed to be doing his job, which was the same sort of thing. Brayshaw was magnificent as usual. Hibberd really impressed again.
Yep.
I thought this was going to be his last season by a long shot, but he's just added that big body when absolutely needed sort of role.
He's been fantastic, hasn't he? And he looks in ripping nick.
Yeah,
he looks like he's dropped weight. So does Salen. He looks like he's dropped a bit of weight as well.
Yeah, and the other big advantage of Hibberd is when he's in that sort of break glass scenario. Only one person's left to stop it. He's got these fantastic long kicks that, like May in the kick out, just clear the zone. The opposition might go to the opposition, but it's 2 kicks out down the field. So it's as we've said before, it's all about percentages. So it's great to see the back line together. While the winning margin was only 14 points in the end, at 3/4 time, they'd only scored 48 points against us.
Yeah,
that's 48 points in 3/4 of football, and that was after they led in the first quarter quite easily
and dominated really for big chunks of the game. So
take away those last 3 goals, which were depends which way you look at it, taking the foot off accelerator or junk time or whatever. But 48 points to 3/4 time in the team that's pushing to get into the 8 is a pretty damn good
with
effort
all of
by
their
the
guns
defenders.
in there.
Yeah,
Rosie up and about, who also was kept quiet.
Yeah.
Just linking back to that. The question about the sort of clearance or the differentials, where that comes from. The advantage, like they talked about it on the coverage in the call about when Brayshaw went back and took the goalkeeping mark or that loose player back. That's only possible because you don't bring the player up to the stoppage. So it's a bit of what you've talked about a number of times this season, George. It's the percentages. So when you look at your math and the percentages, you look at how much you might score from a stoppage with the extra up there, or how much additional you might score, as opposed to how many more goals you give away because you don't have that goalkeeper, that player playing loose in defence, or how we transition from the halfback flank. We get goals from the halfback, not as many as for instance Port, who use that method a lot, but still when you do the math and you work out the numbers, you don't really have to do the math. You can see them on the ladder and the percentage you just talked about, the power of having such a miserly defence.
B-Man, you want to go into your positives? You got a number of them here, so take your pick. What do you want to
just
do?
Fly
All
through
of them?
I'll fly through all of them, Andy. I'll just be quick.
Sure.
I just think the attitude and the mindset and the application of the team has been first class all season. And, we can talk about the sort of weaknesses in the team and the issues that it might be experiencing. And one of the things is what's a symptom and what's a cause. And, for some of the things, the a cause might be considered, that players are complacent. I've read that a number of times on Demonland, or it's an attitude thing, and I just don't see it. The numbers, the tackle numbers, for instance, in this game, 15 more tackles, speaks to a team that is switched on and its heads in the game. We've had a lot to deal with this year in terms of in-game issues that we've touched on. But it seems to me that, there's not been once that the players have dropped their heads or have stopped going in hard or working hard. So I think that's a terrific positive for us this season.
We lost Lever for a good chunk of a quarter as well.
We did. It seems to be remarkable. That's what it must be the fifth game we've had one of our tall defenders
with
out
Petty,
for significant period.
With Petty already out of the game. So
yeah. And just on George's point, it goes to the strength of the defense. We've struggled in a couple of times this year, of course, when we've lost our tall defender, but they did a fantastic job to not allow to hold up before he came back on, Lever. And do we know what the status of his injury is? I'm assuming that it can't be too bad because he wasn't even strapped when he came back on.
So he had a shoulder strap. Was that not the shoulder that he injured?
No, he came into that.
Oh, was that his shoulder?
Strapped? Yeah,
but it also seemed like I thought he couldn't really lift his arm, and I'm lifting my arm here on you can't see me, but it seemed he couldn't lift his arm up to spoil one. But
one of the posters noted that he didn't have his arm around at the end of the team song, that he didn't have his arm around the shoulders of the teammate next to him.
But he's probably sore.
He's probably knowing our history of trying to analyse injuries. He's probably having an amputation this week.
Yeah, it's like resilience. He'll fight back.
I will tell you exactly how this is going to go down. I wrote it down somewhere here, and now I can't find it. But yeah, what will most likely happen is that he'd go through the week. We're not going to hear anything. Maybe we'll get, we'll see, whatever. He'll get selected for the game. He'll be a laid out, and then he'll be 4 to 6 weeks out of the game.
Nice.
That's what's going to happen. That's the Melbourne way.
And it was helpful for him to be playing well because May's in the worst form he's been. He just doesn't look his normal self, Steve May, and making a fair share of increasingly characteristic kicking errors. So my other positives, I sort of touched on it earlier, is we're starting to get some of our swarm. And so we're moving the ball in waves. The commentators made comment on it a couple of times. It was a bit in fits and starts. It wasn't like we could sort of maintain that swarm for whole quarters. That's where we're heading. But when we got it, we generated a lot of our scoring from that swarm when we had multiple options pushing forward. There's a number of examples where we got goals where we just got them out the back, basically, where they push up high up the ground. They don't have that goalkeeper, God knows why, because it would be helpful. And, half of Kozzy's goals is exactly that scenario. So that's a real positive. And the other real positive for me was I criticised in 2020 and part of beginning of last year and through to the Adelaide game last year, Melksham's lack of intensity and effort. I thought he played fantastic in terms of that intensity, effort, 7 tackles, 2 or 3 of which were really big, fantastic tackle on Alir that really set the tone, I thought.
One out on the far wing.
Yeah, his run down. He looked like he was going to give up on that chase, and that's what he would have done in the past, and I bagged him out pretty hard. So I've been very critical of him over the last few years. So, credit where it's due. I thought his intensity was fantastic, and he clearly, in terms of the question about why him, I thought being brought into the side, I thought there were a couple of reasons. One of which, I suspect they were wanting to get a senior body into that team who can take some hits and tackle hard, and which he did. So if that was one of his roles, that's big tick. We talked about in 2019, I think, or 2020, he went through weeks without a tackle. He was averaging 0.2 at a game or something. And he clearly did a defensive role as well. And I think one of the things with that was to mitigate not having that the second genuine tall down there was part of his role to negate the interceptors that Port have. And I thought he did. I mean, again, it's really hard to tell on the television, but Aaliyah didn't have a great deal of influence. How much Melk can be sheeted home to Melk, I'm not sure. But look, I know his disposal numbers weren't huge. But I thought his team effort was fantastic, and that beautiful kick back to Brown when he could have easily had a shot on goal, and I wouldn't have even sort of criticised him for it because he was only 30 metres or 20 metres in the pocket. But instead, he did the team thing and drilled it into Brownie in the corridor. That was a fantastic bit of play for a fella who's desperate to stay in the team, and so no one would have criticised him having a shot at goal. So big ups for Melksham, and we'll see what happens this week with selection.
Let's get into our improvements. Clary will most likely return to the side this week, and you really feel his absence, as I mentioned. And we all know what a magnificent extractor Clayton is of the footy. He's a contested possession beast, and you can't replace what he brings to the team in terms of possessions and clearances. The Bulldogs' midfield is formidable, and we desperately need Clary back to even up the ledger as we go head-to-head with them this week. So for me, that's our improvement to the team, bring him back in, and I'm positive his son will be ready. So, let's get him back.
That's not in the spirit of the improvements.
I'm only going by what you did. That is a classic bin man improvement to not actually single anyone out.
I'm also of the same opinion. I think Clary will be an improvement this week on our midfield performance.
Yeah. It's like saying Donald Barassi might come back in and he's going to improve the 64 premiership side. So, yeah. I had to laugh. Goody said that in one of his presses, when asked about and when confirming he wasn't going to play this week, said that he was being very irritating. But there was a track watcher, I think it was Picket Fence on Demonland, said it was pretty evident he wasn't going to play. He wasn't even using his hand. That he had the injury. But yeah, Goody said he was in his office and he's in his ear about playing. So I think Wild Horses aren't going to be stopping him playing this week.
They said that he was going over to Northern Territory with the team. What reason do you think that would be? That he went over this week with the team? Because
I assume they do community stuff and, it's all part of that experience and what they give back. And Kozzy did too, apparently. And, it wasn't a fantastic. I saw a couple of photos in Demonland of photos of Kozzy surrounded after the game with a whole bunch of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And
it would have been fantastic. I mean, awesome. As I said, it couldn't have been a better person to do what he did, just for the community there, and they all look up to him, and it's great for the D's as well, because you got a whole lot of young kids there that would just idolise him, and for them to witness that in the flesh is an experience that they'll remember forever, and And
he did that play on the centre where he won that ball, where he just wins his 50-50 contest. When he's going at the ball just against one other opponent, I don't care who it is, I'm pretty confident he's going to win it. It's incredible, his ability to win those one-on-ones. Just as a left field question, what did you think about that free to him, the high free?
Well, when you compare it to the Collingwood guy, I thought it was fine. I don't think
from one angle,
I don't think
it looked like he had his head ripped off.
It
the
did.
Other
he
angle,
did.
You could
but
see
he also
him raise his arm.
He did raise his arm, and maybe that's how they play. And I think it's you watch.
Apparently, that's going to be outlawed. They do that now.
You watch Spargo. He always he doesn't cop it like this Ginnivan does, but this guy acts like a pork chop all the time. But Spargo does it all the time.
You're certainly right, Ben Man. From the other angle, the head high was there before the arm even moved. He was absolutely collared, but from the other side, just depends on which side the umpire is going to be.
He was on the camera side, if that makes sense.
yeah. But Yeah, certainly from that second shot, he nearly had his head ripped off before anything else had happened. So, yep.
Well, I would have been pretty annoyed if he didn't. I actually had really hard to adjudicate, but I thought Rosie's one where he definitely dropped his knees, and Salo got him high from behind. He got him on the shoulder, but he definitely dropped his knees. But I saw on the couch that they're going to do a memo. AFL going to do a memo. Drop the knees, raise the arm, and it's going to be called played on. But in that they used Kozzy as an example. But in that circumstance, he couldn't blame the umpire for paying it because it looked like he had his head torn off. But
and
even the commentator said, I think Taylor said,
as with all the memo ones, there's going to be ones that slip through the net and.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and we'll be the major non-beneficiaries.
Yes.
Yeah, I actually think the umpires did a pretty good job. To be fair, it was a pretty well umpired game, I reckon.
What was amazing was that I've never heard of those umpires' names before. There was none of the majors, and I thought, here we are, we've got the Sandful seconds turning up to do the job. But they did a very good job.
I believe they work for the Alice Springs Times. George, yes, a big man.
Sorry, go. No, George.
George, we got you wanted your improvements of forward line, but before you do that, we've got a few. We had a few posters in our weekly podcast thread. They've asked some questions about our forward line, which you're going to be talking about. So I'm just going to read this. This is from D Old Fart, friend of the show. Our forward half just isn't working right now and hasn't for much of the season, or at least since T-Mac was injured. Do the panel see this as primarily a personnel problem, a form problem, a problem of cohesion, or a problem with our entries? Is it too late in the season to experiment with different personnel? The recent experiments, Weed, Mitch Brown, Melksham, Bedford, haven't borne much fruit. And then Demon Cat has, following on from D Old Fart's question, do we think that our experiment with a smaller forward line has run its course? As much as I love having Bedford in the team, I think there were still times yesterday when we were crying out for another tall forward 50 target, even though our entries got better throughout the game. Personally, I think that we should bring back the too tall structure for the rest of the season and give one of Weed or JVR, that's Jacob Van Rooyen, a run at the last 4 or 5 games. That way, they either have had preparation for the finals campaign or, if fit, T-Mac can slot right back into his usual role without reintroducing a structure that hasn't been utilised for 2 months. As always, looking forward to the pod and curious to hear your thoughts. Go D's. So, George, you can either answer that or give your own opinion. I
don't think there is an answer, and this is the unfortunate thing. The reality is that losing T-Mac has cost us dearly. No doubt we were hoping that Wiedemann would come good, and that certainly hasn't been the case today. We've tried Mitch Brown in there. That didn't work either. We've tried resting rucks in there, and I think this was the first time that one of those resting rucks this week kicked a goal.
A crumbing goal.
But it was a crumbing goal. It wasn't a
handball.
Yeah.
Joe the Goose.
Yeah.
That was a magnificent goal, by the way. That's an absolute ripper.
That was a look away handball. Yeah.
And Nibbler's effort, that was phenomenal.
Yep.
Yeah. We have tried the options that are available to us in the absence of a
not all the options. Not all the
options. And the this is more a discussion point than an answer. The next one obviously is do you bite the bullet and bring back Weed for another try, or do you bring in JVR? Now, I'm in the JVR school. I don't think we've got anything to lose at this stage because the other solutions haven't provided anything. Our biggest problem at the moment, it's a big problem. Just when you look at the scores 4 on the same ladder, thank goodness again for our defenders, Melbourne sits at 1468, a point scored 4. The next lowest team is the Saints in 10th position with 1333. So that tells you the difference. Basically, any team in the 8, apart from ourselves, is scoring far more than what we do. Now, we've got different setups. Ours has been forced upon us, unfortunately. But what do we do from here? I agree with our posters. We tried all these options. They don't seem to be working, but we are still winning games. how long that's going to last and whether we can hold it up in a final series when you've got all those other 7 teams in the 8 at the moment certainly outscoring us. So it's going to be a very difficult one. It's going to be made even more difficult because they didn't make the decision this week when Casey have had a bye. So people like other options that might have been available to us, like JVR and like Weed, haven't played now for 2 weeks. What do we do with nothing to look at again? It's a really difficult one. The resting rucks, like I said, hasn't worked all that well. Gawn is, for me, spending inordinate amounts of time forward. I think he's still carrying some sort of injury.
Has to be, yeah.
And when I was writing some notes during the game in the second quarter, it was about 10 minutes in, and I wrote the note to myself, where is Gawn? And he's standing in the goal square, not really providing the any value there, and I'm wondering whether they're actually getting a decent rest by doing that sort of thing. Perhaps sitting on the bench when it's 26 degrees at the game would have been a better option, but we'd already set that course of action in play at selection table. So it's a difficult one. I don't know that there's an answer at the moment. The ball really is in the coaching and selection panels court this week. We'll have to wait and see what they come out with.
Bin Man?
Yeah, I guess it's probably not surprising, but I've got a bit of a different perspective, and I just don't think it's an issue, really. I mean, the issue that I do think there is exactly what you said, George, about T-Mac out. And I said that the week before he was injured. I said, my concern is if we lose one of our tools, is that it's so fundamental to our system. Joe Mantegna, as I said on the first crack that he confidently predicted that the Ds would go 2 tall, 2 mediums and 2 smalls, Melksham being one of the mediums. And it's not going to happen. We're going to go back to a 2 tall model. And here's my tip. My tip is that they've been slamming Sam in the way that they did Brown last year and gave him a mini pre-season, mid-season. And I would be really surprised if Weeds doesn't come in for, maybe not this week, for the I suspect he'll come in for the Freo game and remain in the side and only come out if T-Mac is good to go, because it's fundamental to the way we play. And it goes back to my point about Goody's repetition, is that tactically he keeps playing the same game plan even when we're not got the 2 tall. So, much to many people's frustration, continually kicking to the pockets, for instance. That's what we do with the 2 talls. We bring it to ground, but we've only got the 1 genuine tall. I thought Benny Brown was fantastic in this game.
Yep.
Worked super hard. And he showed what that forward role is. It's a bit like the way Geelong have got Cameron playing. He does as much of his work up the ground as he does inside 50. And you watch if you look at the replay again, how often it's him kicking it inside 50. He's at the chain, his efforts. And when you watch him, when he can't mark, he's often being dragged. He should get a lot more free kicks than he gets. But if he can't mark, he's very focused on bringing it to ground. You need the other tall to block and to do that, and I think Weed is the player who will come in. Our collective concerns are probably not going to disappear. I just don't think JVR is the right player to play that role. I think, as I've said, JVR is a smoky to come in at some point, but again, going back to my point about Goodwin's sort of mantra about defence, we have deliberately, he said in the second game of the season, we're not worrying about scoring. So that 0.4 thing is a bit of a furphy. Our percentage is almost exactly what it was last year. And again, those parallels to last year are exactly the same. We're having exactly the same conversation. All the media people were talking about Melbourne's connection, where we go 2 smalls. Right through the year, exactly the same conversations being had. The bottom line is that it wasn't a problem early on, and it isn't likely to be if we can come good. That's a big query on that. But just in this game, for instance, the narrative is that our connection's poor. Our narrative is that we're not, something's wrong with our forward line. It's a big weakness for us. We had 49 inside 50s and we had 23 scoring shots. We went from almost at 50%. Our average is 40%. So we had a phenomenally good game from a conversion point of view. And Goody, again, he made that point. He brought that up himself. And he said, really, we just got to get the ball inside 50 more. That was his answer to the scoring. He was asked about the scoring. That was his quote, is that we just got to get the ball inside 50 more, because we went at 50% rate, scoring rate when we did. So that, to me, doesn't speak of a forward line that's really got that many problems. I can't imagine that they'll not go bring in the extra tall, but a lot rides on what Wiedemann does and his ability to play the role that T-Mac played. So, let's hope he can pull something out.
Well, Diov was in the chat room, so hopefully that answers your question or brings up more questions, and we'll see you in the thread during the week.
I'll just say Stu in the chat rooms that he was just typing a similar thought to say that JVR or Wheat is the mini Prees given to Brown last year. And, the thing about JVR is he's a genuine X factor, and you don't show off all your Christmas presents that day. You put them away. And again, if you look at the parallels to last season, Bowie came in late. I was super surprised you'd bring a player in at that point in the season. I wouldn't be shocked if JVR gets a look in at some point late in the season and plays on, because he's, as we've talked a lot, he's got it, hasn't he? So,
All right, but B-Man, you can go into your improvements.
So in terms of, it doesn't seem like I just think everything's going to be rosy. I think we've got a really pretty average kicking team. Our best player, arguably our best player, Petrarca or Oliver. Petrarca is a terrible field kick often. He hits a lot of good ones and he gets good depth, but technically he's got a big problem. I think that, we've got a lot of players with average technique. And I just watched a little bit of the highlights of Nick Dacos' game, and his kicking is just magnificent. So it worries me a little bit under pressure. As you pointed out, Andy, it'll come back to haunt us at some stage. It has already with the Swans game as an example. We'd probably win that game with some accurate kicking. But again, it's when we're up and about and we're playing our best swarm footy, then it doesn't really matter so much, because, that we're a territory team that sort of, as Goody keeps saying, and again, it's good to listen to what his messages are, is that we're not seeking perfection. So he just wants to get the ball in. And just on that, not seeking perfection, there was a stat that was brought up by one of the commentators about, I think just after the Geelong game, that the last 50 entries for Oliver and Petrarca had hit 2 targets inside 50. Yeah. And that was as evidence of our terrible connection going forward. To me, that's evidence of, obviously fatigue-related stuff, but it's also our model, is because, as we've talked about here on the podcast a number of times, both players, but particular track, it's really obvious, and we saw it again on the weekend. He deliberately kicks mongrels inside 50 to maximise the likelihood that they can't mark it as well as us. And so often they're not looking for a target inside 50, they're just looking to get it inside 50. The other improvement is Fritta's burning players. I had to laugh with King saying that the Fritta barbecue, because it didn't really make any metaphorical sense. Like he's like burn players, like maybe in fire or whatever.
Blowtorch.
And I was going to bring it up last week as my improvement, actually, when he burnt, I think it was Langer last week, having burnt track the previous week before. And it was a shocker in this game in the first quarter, burning Spargo. I'm not sure, actually, maybe he was trying to kick, because the obvious thing to do would have been to still kick for goal and let Spargo run onto it. Then he's got the best of both worlds. He doesn't look selfish and he could still kick the goal. Maybe he was trying that. So I posted on Demonland after the Geelong game, still angry about it, that, that I'd drop him, but I'm not Simon Goodwin. And of course, it would have been stupid to drop him. You don't drop your best forward. So that was a stupid thought, but I was furious, and I was furious to see it again. That's balanced up. A number of posters have made some really good points about, in fact, how many score involvements he had in the game, and how good he is at sharing the ball. So, but they don't look great, because Melbourne build our brand is, if anything, selflessness is almost the number one thing, isn't it? So,
later in the game, I think he was told off for it during the game. And later in the game, he actually did give off a handball that I think missed the target. And I thought at the time he should have had the shot. But he was trying to be unselfish. So, yeah, I mean, he's a type of player that is an opportunistic type of player. So he's got to sometimes take those shots. But yeah, he clearly burnt a few players the last few weeks.
No, I think it's easy to forget that he is our top goal scorer this year
and last.
And the reason they're there is because they're able to do things that others can't. And sometimes when they do something like that, trying to get another score, they fail occasionally, and it does look very bad. But Kozzy burnt players as well on the weekend, but he kicked goals.
Yeah. When they kick them, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I mean, they were absolutely ridiculous, some of his shots.
Yeah.
But they went through.
Yeah.
If they didn't go through, there'd be people to be blowing up on Demon Land and everywhere else and giving.
Except Fritter's ones have been pretty bad, though.
They have. I've got no question, no argument about that.
There's taking a shot. I mean, there's taking a shot. There's actually a good argument to say take the shot if getting the pass to the player is equally difficult as kicking the goal or equally low probability. But, again, it's your point about percentages. And the percentage play in that one to Spargo was to bloody handball it over the top or just dinky kick and let him run onto it. I mean, and it just so happened that he got given a goal later on by Track. I think it was one of his goals. It was almost as if, look, this is what you should be doing. So, I'm probably guilty about making a mountain out of a molehill, but I was pretty furious down at Cat Town, I could say that for sure. And particularly in this first game because, it didn't look like we'd come out on all cylinders firing, and it just felt like one of those games we needed things to go our way. But you're right. I mean, he really is our best forward, all things considered, isn't he?
We do have a caller on the line. Before we go, I believe it's Terence. Terence, before we go to you, Lazy in the chat room says, still wonder if Salo's knee is right. Chip cartilage doesn't sound like a straightforward knee injury. And then Stu has said, yes, Salem has definitely seemed hesitant and lacking confidence, definitely way off his best. And I've noticed that too. I don't think his disposal is as good as it has been, silky as it has been. And there's something a little bit off in his game,
And that's really my point about kicking. Like, he is so far generally our best kick, Bowie's been brilliant as well. You take Bowie out of the team and Salo looks a different player in terms of his kicking accuracy, and May's been all over the shop. You've got three defenders there who, all collectively make Gus's left foot kicking fantastic. So, he hasn't looked himself, has he? And
no, I think it's easy to forget how long he was out of the side as well. And as soon as people get those sort of injuries, they can't run. The first game back, I think, was against Collingwood, if I remember. He just had no power and no depth in his kick. When you can't get out there and run and get your strength back, then it affects your ability to do that. And I don't think he's at 100% by any stretch.
No wonder, George. It's a bit hard to sort of tell. Do you think that Gus's new roll down back, which is in some parts similar, it's a different role to Salo's, but similar in the sense that he often plays, that quarterback style of sort of marshalling the troops. I wonder whether that he's struggled a little bit to find, in combination with getting back from an injury, also to work out what his role is going to be. They're so focused on role execution, and he's had 8 weeks out where he comes back into the team and he's being maybe asked to do a slightly different role. Perhaps that also takes some time to.
The other one that has dropped off in the last couple of weeks is Stephen May as well, with his short kicks in particular. He misses targets and kicks it over the boundary line in recent times far too often. So I'm wondering whether there's something there as well. But let's hope that both improve from here on in as we head towards finals.
Terence, welcome back to the Demonland podcast.
Thank you, Andy. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Very good. I'll keep it short. Just picking up, and I'm not sure that it adds a lot of value, but when I was watching on the couch earlier today, they put up a slide saying that in terms of performance, where people are on the ladder in terms of performance, Geelong's at the top, no surprises there, and Melbourne's not even in the top 8. So I got a little concerned about that. So I really quickly, just games won and lost and so on. As it turned out this time, this was from round 10 and to round 18, okay? So I did what Binman has been saying a few times this year, which is go back and look to see, where we were in 2021 versus where we are in 2022. And I didn't do percentages. I just did, the 4 points for and, 0 if you didn't win. And we were actually sitting 7th in 2021 out of the top 8. And this time, it's where statistics can be a little bit deceptive, if you feel like. We weren't in the top 8 this year, but the reality is on the points that we've got, the 16 points that we've got for that period of time, we were on that with 3 other clubs. So although we're out, we're probably just out on percentage. So I must admit my MFCSS was a little concerned, but after having had a look at that, Andy, I feel a little bit better about where we are if we're only out of that performance top 8 on the basis of percentage. And you guys have spent quite a bit of time talking about our scoring and key and so on. I don't feel as though we're in that bad a shape at this stage. I just wondered if anyone else had any thoughts about that.
With me, my only concern about that form when you're making the comparisons from this year and last year and taking the whole loading out of it, my only concern is who we lost to last year and who we lost to this year. Having said that, though, couple of those games, the Fremantle game, the Sydney game, and certainly the Collingwood game, we did have in-game injuries during those games that did impact how we played. So I can see sort of what transpired in those games to help us lose. And plus, we did get away to big leads in some of those games. We were leading before injuries hit us. So from that point of view, I'm not concerned too much, but yeah, it is a little bit worrying about who we lost to, and I guess the worrying thing is how we performed against Geelong. They're clearly the informed team, and they
except if you, as I do, obviously, if you think that fatigue is a big factor. So if we play those teams early in the season, then that ladder, I mean, it's interesting because that ladder basically, they bring that up and they keep talking about since round 10, Team X is and they're talking about the top teams. Since round 10, Freo are going defensively. They've gone from number 1 up to round 10 without the ball and defensively and scores against, and now they're about mid-table. Now, I've heard all of those stats except for Geelong is the only one that I haven't, and they've won through that period, which is ironic. But if you accept that that's a factor, regardless of the degree to which you think it's a factor, whether you think it's just one of the factors, the loading I'm talking about, or it's the major factor, as I do. Either way, it's a medium factor or a big factor means that you're going to struggle more against the top 4 teams. And we played, as you say, Freo and Sydney, and now Collingwood in that period too. Collingwood are pushing for top 4. Suddenly that loss doesn't look so bad, does it? I think it's a bit of a furphy, those form ladders, and let's just wait till the round 23 ladder, and then we'll get a handle on a full season of data to work out where the teams are at.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I guess just one thing, and it's more a hope, a wish and a prayer, if you like. I really hope we're going to be able to, as you suggested a few weeks ago, Binman, that we're going to be able to bury Collingwood when we play them. They look terrific at the moment, but as you said, they haven't necessarily had the loading issues that we have. So I'm hoping that we're going to do well. And then the last point, Andy, was I did put it on the post, but I was really impressed with a little bit on the website showing a couple of minutes of the football game at St. Teresa with the grass. It really looked terrific. So we talk about the community outreach. I thought that was something really special. So I don't know whether you guys picked up on it or not, and what you thought about it.
I'll let the guys in a second answer that one if they do have anything to say. But just on Collingwood, I don't know how fantastic they look at the moment. With the exception of their last quarters in the last 2 weeks, they've nearly lost to North Melbourne and Adelaide. So they have got out of jail, and perhaps if results had gone the other way, then maybe they...
It's good for footy having Collingwood up and about, but I'm with Terence. I can't wait for that return bout, and I hope we smash them. But they're playing that model, that territory model, and it's clear that that's the model. That's what works at the moment. It might change in another couple of years, but they've implemented it fantastically, and they've done the last few weeks. Is what's his name back from his injury, his shoulder? Speaking of shoulder injuries, Darcy Moore. Did he play in the weekend?
I don't know.
Don't know. Avoid watching Collingwood games.
Yeah.
On Terence's point about Santa Teresa, it's a great effort from both Melbourne Footy Club and the Melbourne Cricket Club as well. And I know there was a big group of Melbourne supporters went out there as well to the site. It's quite remarkable, and the shots from the aerial shots that you saw on the television, with the green grass in the middle of horizon to horizon red dirt is quite remarkable, and does great things to promote the game of AFL, but also our club within the Northern Territory. So it was a great effort by everyone all round.
Yeah, I thought with Kate Ruffy there, and also Gary Pert there was, to your point, George, just really good ambassadorship. So, all right, I'll leave you guys to it. I appreciate the opportunity to just pipe in with those couple of points. So thank you very much, Andy.
Thanks
Good on you, Terence.
Thanks, Terence. Thanks for listening. So let's move on to Casey had the bye this week. Obviously, they remain undefeated, and despite not playing, they are 2 games and a healthy almost 20% clear on top of the ladder. There are 4 games remaining in the VFL season. The next 2 matches are against teams outside the 8. They then round out the season with matches against 3rd and 4th on the ladder respectively. In the absence of anything to talk about on the Casey front, let's dive straight into the ins and outs. And all eyes will no doubt be on whether Clary has recovered sufficiently from surgery on his thumb. If he's good to go, he's the biggest certainty in history to make a return to the team. We'll also be sweating on any results on any scans that Jake Lever is likely to have on his shoulder, which he injured when he fell awkwardly in a marking contest. He was able to play out the match, but as someone in our chat room mentioned, he couldn't lift his arm around someone's shoulder in the song, but I'm sure that would have been... Sure, he would have been sore anyway. If he's in for a stint on the sidelines or misses this week, Petty will most likely return from health and safety protocols. So if Lever does miss, then Tomlinson will most likely remain in the side. Bin Man, maybe I'll start with you. Who makes way for Clary? And in addition, will we bring in the tall forward to alleviate some of the load on Ben Brown?
I don't think they will this week, but as I said, I've been wanting to say this for ages. Bookmark it. Weed will be the tall forward. It'll be really disappointing for Tomo, won't it, if he has to go out? I mean, I thought he was terrific. His kicking was good. I really like the fact that when Marshall outmarked him a few minutes later on the wing, he outmarked Marshall. To me, he's a really competitive fella. He's not quite tall enough for this role, but he has played centre-half forward before. He wasn't brilliant at it, but he played almost a full season, I think 2017 at GWS as a centre-half forward. As I say, he's probably not big enough, and you might as well then put JVR in.
I'd play Petty up forward if we're going to do something like that. If we're not going to bring in Weed or JVR, then
you don't take your future All-Australian out of your defence.
I know.
I mean, it's the repetition. It's good his philosophy. You don't change things. And so, each week on Demonland, just replace Spargo with Kozzy, with Petty, with Gus going into the middle is the flavour of the week. Why don't we put Gus in the middle? I mean, Goody doesn't change. No. What do people want? A big sign that says Goody doesn't make radical changes. So I to be honest, I would like Tomo he seems to would be a logical medi-sub, wouldn't he? Because he can play in multiple positions and even as a ruckman at a pinch. So, and just for his sake, I guess I'd love to see him around the team, and because Chandler is the other one, the Medi sub. But I think just strategically, I would have thought Tomo gives you good flexibility. Oliver obviously comes back in. Presume he's fit. Levy, if he's not fit, you'd probably just be the one change really, which is Tomo going out for I'm sure with Oliver coming back in. I mean, people talk about Bedford on Demonland a lot, but it's really hard to know without knowing what his role is. And so therefore you can't judge them. I mean, as I said a couple of weeks ago, stats are meaningless these days in terms of almost meaningless in terms of working out, the performance through the eyes of the club, because they're not the key performance indicator. Again, Goody's made that point a number of times. And you see it with Kozzy. He got his 6 goals this week, but, I'm sure Goody would say that he only got that because he's worked so hard every week that eventually he'll get his turn in the sun. So, unfortunately, Petty probably comes back in for Tomo. Unfortunately for Tomo, I should say. Oliver comes back in. Maybe that will push Bedford out, or at least back to the bench. I'm not sure. What do you think, George?
Yeah, I can't see Bedford getting another run after, what was it this week? 5 possessions and 3 last week. There's regardless of anything else that he's providing, it's just not enough output for a forward. We've talked about the forward problems. You can't afford someone in there who's not providing what is needed, and particularly if you're running others in there who aren't, providing a lot of defensive effort. You've got to be kicking goals if you're not doing that. So
unless Melksham's not, might end up staying in this week. If Weed doesn't come in, Melksham probably stays and Bedford goes out. You think?
That's the scenario that and if Weed comes in, who else drops out? So it's Monday night. Like Andy said, we'll probably find out about some strange injury in the next day or two, and it'll all change. But Bedford was the one for me that didn't provide enough to the side. Tomo would be really, really stiff given what he did. But I was thinking the same way as you. I thought a Medi sub for Tomo. Last thing we need is one of our defenders going down again, and there's plenty of COVID going around to boot as well. So Tomo provides an option as a ruck, as a back, and as a makeshift forward if
yeah, exactly. Necessary. He can go up forward. That's right.
But we are not going to move Petty forward. So
no. Or put Gus in the middle.
And we're not putting Gus in the middle.
I know you didn't say that, but you're my proxy. You're my straw man for such comments.
No.
I just want to point out, so, when you're talking about Medi subs, it's always interesting to see when the twos are playing, and we've had a lot of instances this year where our twos have played on a completely different day to our seniors, usually the day after, where it's given us the flexibility to have someone as a Medi sub, but then they're able to play a full game the next day or a few days later, whenever we've been playing in the twos. However, going forward, we play the Bulldogs this week on Saturday night. We play their reserves on Saturday at 2:00 on the same day, so we're sort of unable. I can't do it this week. Next week, when we go over to Freo, we're playing Northern Bull Ants on the Saturday. So obviously, playing Freo on a Friday night, we're going to take players out of Casey to come with the team, so they're then unable to play a game of footy unless they get them on the red eye back, which we don't know whether they'll do or whether they can do that, because there's a 1:00 game on a Saturday. We have the next week, Casey has the bye. That's the week we play Collingwood. So there's no game for anyone to play then.
Another
bye. That's we've had a lot of byes in the last few weeks. The game against Carlton, we're playing Carlton Saturday night, but we're also playing their reserves on Saturday at 12 p.m. So same day. And then the game against Brisbane, this is where we may be able to. We don't know when our Brisbane game is. And we don't know when the reserves is. So our Casey is going there as well. So if it's on this, we might play them on a Friday night. We're either playing Brisbane on a Friday night or we'll play them on a Saturday night. That's my tip. So who knows when we'll play their reserves team. But yeah, we might not have an opportunity, is what I'm getting at, to sort of with Medi subs. So they're going to have to chop and change. They can't have that same player play every week. It's going to be different Medi subs every week going into the last few
Well,
months.
not necessarily. They could just not. I mean, Bedford didn't go back to the Magoos last year because they didn't play. So
well, they didn't play. That was a different thing, but they'd wanted
it. Sorry, this year. Jordan, I meant, Jordan was the Medi sub the whole time. But, I mean, Tomo was dead unlucky because one thing about Goody is that over his journey, he's rewarded players who have come in and played a role and kept them in the team. The asterisk is unless a best 22 or a best 4 or 5 player is needing to come back in. And, for me, it's probably a big call, but Petty's a top 10 player in that team for me. He's a future All-Australian defender who is super important to the way we play. He's aggressive, intercepting is allowing Lever not to have to play that role as often, and they waxing between him and Petty. So, it's really unfortunate for Tomo because Petty comes straight back in, and, I mean, just as Oliver comes straight back in, so...
And then we've got to look at matchups as well, which when we talk about the opposition analysis, we'll get into that. We'll get into that opposition watch now. And despite an underwhelming season thus far, the Bulldogs are fighting it out with the Tigers and the Saints for the final position in the 8, and will not be easy beats. They had the added incentive of doling out some revenge for last year's grand final, as well as dealing us a blow in our aspirations of top 4 and top spot on the ladder. This week, they easily accounted for fellow finals aspirant, the Saints, on Friday night at Marvel Stadium after 2 weeks on the road where they were soundly beaten by finals-bound Brisbane and Sydney. Marcus Bontempelli starred in the win over the Saints, racking up 34 possessions and kicking 2 goals, whilst Jabbar Ugle-Hagan kicked 3 goals from 6 disposals. The rest of the Dogs' midfield do what they do best, and that's racking up large numbers of possessions. And George, you've been keeping a close eye on the Dogs. What can we expect from them?
There's a couple of things I'd like to bring up for a start. Firstly, the comment from Chris Scott a couple of weeks ago where he said, it doesn't matter who you're playing, it's when you play them. Now, that was said in other context, but let's have a look at the last 3 games for us and their potential game against the Bulldogs and who they were playing the previous week and the outcomes. 4 weeks ago, Adelaide played North Melbourne. Scores 115-58. Adelaide didn't have much of a workout in that game, and we played them the following week. After that, Geelong played North 144-32. Again, the same thing. Geelong got no workout against North, and then we get to play them the following week. Port last week, or the previous week, 84 to the Giants 29. Hardly a workout again.
In a training run,
a training run. And and guess what? The Bulldogs 86 against St Kilda 56 for this week. For the last 3 weeks and coming up now for the 4th week, each of our opponents has had basically a bye, what you might call a bye.
St Kilda kicked most of their score in the last quarter as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was a junk time.
Exactly. So,
but they also only had 11 tackles at halftime in a game of AFL footy.
The commentators in this game, and it takes them a lot for them to be honest about what's happening on the field, given what their AFL overlords. We're talking about another week of bruise-free football. About the St Kilda game, it was absolutely appalling watching what was going on. The Dogs were 6 goals up at the end of the first quarter. It was just witches' hats all over the ground. Their goals were courtesy of all their midfield dominance. It was basically Bontempelli and Liberatore versus St Kilda, and yet at the end they only managed to win by 28 points. Now, whether they took the foot off the accelerator, I don't know, or whether or whether the dogs actually ran out of legs again. We know all about that little problem from our finals performance last year.
I watched that game because I had a bet on it on the Saints, and they just they just put the cue in the rack. The dogs,
Yeah.
so they weren't running out of puff. That was a training run right to the end of that game.
Yeah. Look, once again, it was just hard to take anything out of the game about what was going on and how it would affect our game. They didn't have Norton up forward for the Bulldogs. Bruce got 2 possessions, I think, for the whole game. So that shows you the dominance of the dominance of the Dogs in this game, when their 2 major forwards basically either weren't on the field or didn't touch the ball. I'd anticipate that Norton will be back this week. He was out with a knee strain and was a test for last week, but obviously didn't come up. Liberatore and Bontempelli are the 2 ones, and I do wish the umpires would start paying throwing the ball, because it was just appalling watching it time after time after time. Deliberate throws that are coming out, and we've seen this for the Dogs for the last 6 years now. But because they were moving the ball so freely and easily, no one was going to stop it. So basically, from that game, what I took out, you shut those 2 down in the middle, in particular, and you're going to shut down the Bulldogs. They don't have a great deal of anything else to offer. They were just running free all over the ground. If you let them do that, they're going to win the game, which they certainly did.
You touch on an interesting point that is sort of circling back to the conversation we were having before about our form and the form ladder, but also even our offense and the way, comparing this season to last season, and, that the parallels. But one parallel that isn't true is that last season we weren't the reigning premiers. This season, not only that point, has happened to us a number of times where we're coming up against teams who have had a pretty easy run the previous week. Every week we're coming up against a team and who's got us in their sights, where the benchmark, the lower teams get the opportunity to test their systems against the best. The contenders want to get a psychological edge over us for come finals. And then you get teams like the Dogs who are scrapping for the finals, but of course have got plenty of psychological ammunition to want to beat us, for the next few years. That's going to be there if you get beaten in a grand final. And, that's always going to be a factor. So we've had that to contend with this year in a way that, we haven't had previously, and I guess that's the lot of any premier, isn't it? So it's a happy problem to have. But I think it's a good point about the differences. And they played on the Saturday, didn't they?
Friday night.
So Friday night. So I got 2 extra days plus no travel. We've had the heat up in Alice Springs and all of the travel when they went up earlier, so their routines would been thrown out a little bit. You'd expect so. Some of the players went up earlier. I think that, so the Dogs have got a lot. I again won't be shocked if we lose this game. I'd be really pleased, as I flagged last week, if we get out of these 2 games with 2 wins, will be just a phenomenal performance. The one thing I'd say, George, is that our system is kryptonite, and we've talked about that a lot of times about Doggies, is that, they still got this method of flipping it around and quick handballs and lots of chains. What I noted before is that our effort and pressure has been okay. It was pretty low in this game, 145 average I read on Demonland. I'm not quite sure how I'd love to be able to get that consistently. The heat might have been a factor for that. But if we can bring the level of effort in our contested ball, it breaks down those chains for them. Did you say you think Norton will play or won't play?
I think he will. He was a test last week.
So I've got their injury list updated July 18th, I believe is today. Lockie Hunter, health and safety protocols available. Aaron Norton, health and safety protocols available. Josh Shackey, health and safety protocols available. Zane Cordy, health and safety protocols available. And Steph Martin, shoulder available.
Well, let's just hope. I'm really hopeful that Shackey can get up. I mean, that would be really big in for them. So, Bruce, it's good to have Bruce back. And Bruce, seeing him play last weekend reminded me of the T-Mac situation because their season got torpedoed last year as soon as Bruce was out of that side. And as we've joked about over the years, Bruce always kicks 12 goals against us. So it doesn't matter whether he's playing for St Kilda or the Dogs.
I don't think he will this week, though. It looks like he's put on about 5 kilos.
Yeah, he does look he's been below.
Yeah, he has been. So, I think it was only 2 possessions last week. He just wasn't sighted at all. Long way from it. It's not surprising when you've been out for that long.
We'll play him back into form, and he'll come out of the game 5 kilos lighter.
He will. He'll lose it all in the game. Caleb Daniel is still out. He's 1 to 2 weeks. Hayden Crozier 2 to 3, and Taylor Duray 2 to 3 weeks. None of them are playing. Crozier and Daniel, and Crozier usually plays well against us too.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're out.
Good.
Anything else about this game, boys, before we wrap it up?
No, just final thought from me was Brian Taylor was in rare form on the weekend, but he's got a unique form of dyslexia. When Gus got picked up by...
what was... He confused the players. It was Dixon.
Dixon picked up Gus, and all the world looked like he was going to body slam him, and then stopped, which was bloody lucky for Gus because he could have done without another concussion. And then, they showed a replay of it, and Brian Taylor says to Silk, quote unquote Silk, who was pointing out that it's great to see Goody on the bench. They're obviously really needing to see us fired up. It's like, paid analyst there.
No, didn't he say, it's good to see the coach on the bench to, he can fire up the
his
players.
The implication was he's normally up in the box.
Have you not watched Melbourne? Did you not watch during the finals?
Exactly. It was what have you been doing here? I mean, he did play footy last year against us, didn't he? So he would have seen, but then he said Dixon, he asked Silk how much does Dixon weigh? Yeah, does he weigh 140 kilos or something?
Because how did Brayshaw lift him up and almost kill him in a tackle? Well,
yeah, it was the weirdest form of body dyslexia I've ever. It was such a bizarre thing, and no one said anything. It was like, right.
I think when that didn't something blow up in his face a year or 2 ago. I think so.
I don't know.
There was a water heater or something. Yeah. I think there might have been some lasting damage. Allegedly. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's where we'll end it for tonight. Thank you, Terence, for calling in. Thank you, George. Thank you, Bin Man. We'll be back next week. Hopefully, we get through these weeks, as Bin Man says, unscathed and ready to fight for that top 2 spot.
Go Relax.
Go.